Hello, and welcome to the Crash Chords podcast. It's the bottom of the hour, and the sun should be up in about 30 minutes. We're digging at the bottom of the record collection, and let's pass you over to Matt. We have Matt, John, Steve, your usual crew.
And suddenly we're on NPR. I feel dirty.
No, we're on Jazz 88.
Oh, Jazz 88. Oh, so you're basing it on a specific network.
Jazz?
That's funny.
Just because you bring us a jazz album, you're like, nah, I could jazz the whole thing up. Jazz, jazz, jazz.
No, it's just in a very mellow mood.
It's fine. Except
Really?
there's no time on the internet.
That's true, but they don't know when we did it. It could be,
Not 9:30 at night on Monday.
Oh, damn it! He ruined it. It's prime time. It's the prime time on a really off day, though. So
Yeah, that's true.
we're kind of in that mood.
Welcome, as Steve has said, welcome to the Crash Chords podcast. We're
I'm ashamed. That's what I am.
that's okay. No one cares what John thinks. So this week I got to see two musicals actually.
Yeah.
One was First Date, starring my buddy Zachary Levi, which pisses
You
John off.
cannot use the term putty.
We're definitely nerd bros, though. Totally nerd bros. Anyway, it's a Broadway musical that just opened this past week, I think, or the week before. And it's pretty honest in what it's trying to be. It's just a fun, almost kind of sitcom-y musical. It has a lot of cutaways and freeze frames, and the music's good, and it's very wholesome. It's got heart, it's just a fun musical. It's not the best thing you'll ever see on Broadway, but it's definitely enjoyable and worth seeing.
So it's a fun musical.
Yep.
Very fun.
Yes.
Okay.
I know,
so
you're mocking me for using the word fun multiple times.
No,
Shut up
if
and
we
go
were-
home.
No,
We're
I'm
mocking
just
you.
reaffirming that anyone who likes fun out there should definitely go see this musical, because apparently
Would anyone admit that they don't
it's
like
a fun
fun?
musical.
Would anyone just admit that they don't like fun?
I feel like mocking you.
The band, I'm not a fan.
Not fun, period. Just fun.
I thought the fun was assumed.
I don't like
period.
fun.
Thanks, Matt. Moving on. I
You
also
just told an
Make
inside
sure-
joke to a bunch
Yeah,
of
and make
strangers.
sure you gotta make sure you bleep that because I don't think we should put his name on the air.
Why?
That's calling someone out. You could just use his first name.
Anyway.
Anyway.
I also saw Love's Labour's Lost at
The
Shakespeare in the
strangers will be
Park,
offended.
which was the creator of Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson, I keep struggling to say that, took Love's Labour's Lost and added songs to it. And it was actually done very well. The acting was great. It was a lot of fun. They even did a cover towards the end when they're trying to win over the hearts of the four female leads. They sing a cover of To Be With You by Mr. Big, complete with epic guitar solo. It was actually a very fun thing.
The snob
A fun thing it was. Right?
The snob in me is offended that one would take Shakespeare's work and set it to music, for that's not how it was intended. The other part of me remembers what other people have done with Shakespeare's work and realize that's probably the least offensive thing you could do to it.
Also, one of the cast members
I'm more on the snob side, I think. A little bit.
actually, it was very good and it was done well. And
Oh, come on. Remember
I-
Romeo
Well,
and
as we
Juliet?
said before, it's all an iambic pentameter. It's very easy to set music to it. So it's
Right.
like, all right, if they did it in a fun way, then I wouldn't.
It was
complain.
entertaining.
Remember
and
what they
actually,
did?
Rachel
Ooh, he's changing up the word. Look at this.
Rachel
Here's-
Dratch of Saturday Night Live fame
entertaining.
was in it. And Sarah had met her from doing the 24-hour musical, so I got to meet her after the show, and she was very humble and sweet and nice. It was nice.
I'm
so
just
nice.
saying-
Humble,
I'm just
sweet,
saying-
nice, and fun. But you threw in entertaining, so you know what? I'm gonna let it slide.
Obviously, by pointing it out, you're not doing that. But I'm just saying, like, remember 10 Things I Hate About You? Took my favorite comedy by Shakespeare, Taming of the Shrew, and destroyed it. Then there's also Romeo and Juliet, starring Leo, and that whole thing.
That wasn't
That's a very
terrible.
common
That
thing.
was terrible.
Okay, that's a
I
very
disagree.
common thing, though. They're not. I mean, that's not the only example you could pull out. They do this a lot.
Yeah,
they bring
Hamlet's been
Shakespeare
redone
into the modern day.
Hamlet's been redone like 8 times.
And the only reincarnation of Hamlet I've enjoyed is The Lion King.
Interesting. I actually rather prefer the Kenneth Branagh version of Hamlet. But
I've
of course,
never-
that was
I've not
Yeah,
seen
well,
that
that's
wasn't
what
the
gave
modern
him a
one.
career. Also,
that was the original.
Yeah, that was
So in
one of
other
his
words,
big things.
you're like me and you like the originals.
For the most part.
Yes.
Well, the thing is, I have a little problem with people who can't see the Shakespeare stories in any other setting but their own. Like, I feel like they were written in a time, you should be immersed in that time.
Yeah, but
the one chance you get to be immersed in that time, why not take it?
Yeah, but also modernizing some of those is not because they can't see it in that, but because they want to do something different and not be like everyone else who came before them.
Fair
that
enough,
one-
but at the same point, that won't inspire...
Have either of you seen Joss Whedon's Much Ado About Nothing?
Yeah.
It was really well done. And the language was just more or less the same. The setting was just different. Setting was modernized.
You know which one I did not like? What adaptation? I think it was called O. Or Othello. It was a remake of Othello with Keanu Reeves in it.
Oh, that was awful.
What?
Yeah, that was terrible.
What? How is this going
He
onto my
played
radar?
Iago, too, and that was the best part. I know.
What?
Keanu can do roles, but he cannot do Iago.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't even...
He's one
I
of the
can't even-
greatest villains ever created, and you can't get Keanu to do it. You just can't.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess if it works for some people, I don't know.
No, I don't know.
I don't know. But then again, even you take it and you put it in a modern day, then you're still speaking the language of the time, and that there's that disconnect where you know someone's on a cell phone, it throws you off.
Or instead of
I
swords,
disagree.
they're waving around guns. Or
Did
instead
you
of
see-
seats, they're driving
Did you
cars.
see-
Yeah, it's like the language. None of the language implies any of that.
The language is actually kind of timeless.
Oh no, I mean occasionally they do reference specific things. You know?
Right.
Yes, of course it's timeless. That's one of the reasons I think that people should go out and seek the originals.
Yes, but I think also if you do something creative and clever with it, and it works, I think that's just as great.
Sure.
Whatever, you haven't even seen Much Ado yet, so hush.
I read Much Ado.
Yes, but you didn't see the new one. The new one was done very well, which is what I was speaking to.
I see.
That was my example for modernizing, which was done well.
I don't know. That's the one thing I think Joss Whedon has done poorly.
Ooh.
I think Matt's
said
gonna
it.
hit me.
He said it.
He
Oh
almost,
my god. Oh
I
my
thought
god,
about
he
it.
said
yeah, I
it.
know he thought about it, and he knows how much I love Joss Whedon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
All right, can we get back on topic?
Yet again, we were never on a topic.
Oh,
No.
okay. Can we get on a topic?
A topic, alright.
Alright.
Let's just
We
shoot
were-
out a random topic, even though it happens to be the topic of the day.
So, moving on.
Black Sabbath.
Yes, my pick for this week is
No jazz.
Black Sabbath's new record, 13. I found out in doing a
get
little...
off the previous week of jazz, you know.
In doing some research on the record, I found out that the reason it was named 13 is because they started working on this record in 2001, is when this work on this record first began, which hence the number 13. It took them 13 years to finish this record. The drummer for the record was a session drummer. He's actually not a part of Black Sabbath. Can't remember the gentleman's name now, of course.
I quite like the drummer, actually, in this particular record.
So yeah, it's Black Sabbath's newest record. It came out a couple months ago.
It's like 15 years since their last one.
Yeah, their last album, studio album, was 1995. Their last album with Ozzy was a live record in 98.
Well, to give the proper introduction here, what we're trying to do this week, what Matt is trying to do this week, to contrast what I tried to do last week, is bring someone at the forefront of another genre. So I brought Chick Corea, who was at the forefront of jazz, and Matt's trying to bring in, of course, Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne at the forefront of metal. And we're just trying to see what they've been up to, because, let's see, when did they start out as a band?
70s.
Definitely in the 70s.
They were in the 70s.
73-ish?
Yeah, they were in the 70s because then Ozzy went solo in the 80s.
How old is Ozzy Osbourne?
A trillion years old.
If he's a day.
If
no,
he's
you
a
said
day,
last week?
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
He's in his late 60s?
yeah, I think that's
60s.
true.
So all things considered, there's not that big of an age difference here between Chick Corea and Ozzy Osbourne. So yeah,
I might be
it's-
wrong.
Let's check and see
But
what these.
John, odds are in favor
Yeah,
of
but his
that.
kids are in their
What are these
late
seniors
20s, early
doing
30s
today?
anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got to be mid 50s if he really is a day.
Stop saying that.
He
no.
really likes that.
I really
that
do.
phrase. It's-
Well, have you met John? John finds a catchphrase and buries it.
I haven't met him. I mean, there's a lot of recordings of us talking, but I really haven't met him. I
Okay.
never look in his direction ever.
Always
I don't
looking at
blame
the
you.
mic.
It's
I'm looking at
horrifying.
Matt right now.
Yeah, I
I'm
know.
trying to freak
Let's
him
have
out.
a conversation over John and not actually acknowledge him for the rest of the podcast.
Oh.
End of the beginning. Track 1.
The intro to this track was a little long and repetitive, but then it gets into what I called throughout the record standard Sabbath. Yeah.
Well, first off, this is the exposition. This is... I don't see how they necessarily could have put anything here except quintessential Sabbath.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, the first 3 tracks are all just kind of to remind us, oh, it's Black Sabbath.
Right.
You know.
Now, I have issues with this song.
Me too.
First off, yes, it does have a dragging intro. It goes on.
It's heavy. It's
length.
heavy, but it drones. That's the thing, and it's very repetitive. It's really only like a 4-note cycle, and it just goes over and over and over and over again. I understand that it's somewhat of a setting setter, you know. But,
a setting setter?
Oh well, you know, yeah. Let's go with it. Let's go with it.
Sure.
Keep rolling. Keep rolling. It's trying to set the mood of this album, which I think it does fairly well. A touch of ominous, again, Black Sabbath.
It definitely...
A lot of flat 5. Let's throw that out there. A lot of tritone. And I think they've always kind of been in love with the tritone. That's that very dissonant sound that I've described to you before. It's right there. Flat 5 doesn't have much to do with any other chord or any other key, but it clashes. It sort of... It wears on you after a while, but it in the best possible way. I think people actually used to refer to that as the satanic sound back in the olden days, and I think that's one reason why he uses it in almost every single song, but not to any negative end.
I mean, this song essentially, in its whole, is exactly what you'd expect Sabbath to sound like.
Well, for everything that you get in the typical A section intro, the B section is significantly more charismatic.
The second and third parts of this track are what kind of brought me in and engaged me. There was more to it, more character, more soul. It kind of gave you more sense of this futility versus growth. You know, the end of the beginning of the end.
Which is another part I got to point out. Yeah.
Cyclic nature.
Fertility versus growth. And, you know, you hear that and, you know, the upbeat. It's a great riff, great solo. And I actually really like the drum work here. This is where I think he started to shine, at least as a complimentary
We'll also
player.
keep in mind, if you're bringing in a session drummer, you're not going to be bring in some deadbeat. You're going to bring in a great drummer that you know.
Especially if you're Black Sabbath and
Right,
you're holding
obviously.
auditions. Yeah,
There's
obviously.
like maybe half a dozen bands that can do better drummer auditions. I mean, there's very few names as big as this.
Well, the real chance to show off in any Black Sabbath song is during the drum fills, specifically.
Yeah, of course.
Like between phrases and here and there. That's where the drummer gets to kind of go nuts. And even though he didn't go full force in this first track, I still heard it. And I like the stuff he did, you know, complimentary,
And he alluded to what he
accentuating
does
things.
later in the album.
It was really good at the end, the C section, because like every 8-minute Sabbath song, there's A, B, C, if not a full-fledged D section in it. The C section with the outro had definitely the most heart, and I was really starting to groove in that part. That's when they started catching me into that heavy metal riff design, the more fluid drum work, the guitar work. It was really starting to grow on me at that point. And that really set the stage.
You get almost every single thing in this track. You even get the shredding solo at the end. I'm still not sure it was, you know, quite up to par of, you know, his earlier work, the stuff that we all know from Black Sabbath, but because it was a little bit lacking in personality, and I guess that was my one overall problem with this track.
Yeah, but also something I pointed out when we were discussing off the air a little bit is we also have to be careful, and we've done this, and everyone falls kind of into this trap when you're reviewing a band that's been around a long time, is we can't compare this to War Pigs. War Pigs is a very or something on that level, because that's a very specific song.
Right.
A lot of other
Man.
Those were very unique for even Black Sabbath.
The genre-defining songs,
Right.
exactly.
If you start comparing everything to that, you're going to be disappointed with everything, you know. It's the same idea that you couldn't compare everything that Metallica did to one. However, a lot of the new Metallica records also weren't comparable to the average tracks either. And that's the difference.
Well, that's the funny thing. I've heard a lot more clash or backlash against the new Metallica work than I've heard, you know, for this album.
So here's the thing. With Metallica, because I actually have a lot of experience with this, because I'm still stupid and keep buying these records. I drew the line at the new Megadeth album when it got like a 38 on Metacritic. But anyway, Megadeth and Metallica's subsequent records in the more recent history, they've tried something different, but they didn't try a little something different or experiment a little bit here. They made drastic changes that just were so jarring to the listener that most of the fans just went, well, this is crap. Like on...
so I see. And these guys did the exact opposite and kept it real.
They have Aerosmith syndrome.
Yeah.
But
coining that now.
I'm not going to go quite that far.
Because they still have more character.
There's some a little bit of work on this record where I think they do actually move beyond their comfort zone. I don't want to say comfort zone, because there's not groundbreaking work on this record.
The big problem with the Metallica versus this was Metallica, when Saint Anger came out in the mid-2000s, Saint Anger, they tried to make that album sound... They tried to imitate the new metal artists, like Disturbed, Linkin Park, and these bands who were doing a sound for the 2000s. But nobody wants to hear Metallica do that. They want to hear them be Metallica and grow, not try something completely different.
It's a shame. I mean, it all depends on what people are looking for.
Well,
I personally,
also,
as a listener, love to hear
Well, I think it was
growth.
also the fact that they did bad new metal. I think that was the problem.
Well,
because of their
enough.
inexperience with it.
Right.
Getting back to End of the Beginning, because that's a good point. Because it's hard to review a band like Black Sabbath without making comparisons to its early work because of how prolific they are in what they do. Because of how prolific they are in what they do, I was really disappointed in some of the lyrical work on this song. And that's something that, whether alone or in Black Sabbath, Ozzy knows how to speak. For everything you may have seen in his interviews, his TV stuff, when he was just trying to make money.
Disregarded.
Yeah, ignore that, because if you've ever heard the words and gone line by line with, like, Iron Man, you will understand this guy, either he's writing masterpieces or someone's writing it for him. The beginning of End of the Beginning, not to repeat myself, really just had the standard trope of contrary lyrics. Is this heaven? Is this hell? Is this good? Is this bad? And it really wears on me very quickly.
I think it's because it's part of the genre definition, as it were.
Yeah,
Metal loves to bring in those biblical themes and everything. And I'm not saying that, in some sense they are timeless, because now it's fallen into part of the mythology and everything, for mythology, for good or for worse. It's relevant, I still feel. Many of those stories are relevant. And, of course, trying to find yourself in the thick of it, that's relevant also. So I get that. But at the same time, it's been done in so many other metal tracks that I see your point. I can see why it would be a trope at this stage.
But it has redeeming qualities, because later on we get lines like this. You don't want to be a robot ghost occupied inside a human host, analyzed and cloned relentlessly, synthesized until they set you free. That's great!
Yeah, no.
And that's actually not a terrible metaphor for pop culture and pop music as a whole.
Which is great, because it actually does set up a theme work with this album. It's almost... it's hard to really get into it without quoting a lot of other stuff, but there's a theme I see throughout this album that is set up right here of anti-fervor for society. How we really push a lot of ideas that gain some popularity into the forefront, which may not be the best ideas of the world. How we've become somewhat drones, just kowtowing to what, pop culture says we should.
Okay, and I buy that, because there's definitely some tracks, in fact, the very next track, where you could see it might not be as much of a personal debate, as much as it's more of a worldly debate that he's trying to...
More anthem.
A preacher on a pulpit, almost, or just someone on a pulpit on a soapbox.
I wouldn't see the soapbox. No, actually, I would say it's more like society turns itself to the paper and tries to understand itself. It's not a preachy thing. I don't think any of this stuff is preachy.
Oh, no, okay.
Maybe guy holding an end is nigh sign in front of a crowd. I don't know. It's hard because of the themes that they're working in here. It's hard to really define it as any one thing. Yeah, there's a lot of religious elements, but he's not really preaching. But I think it's more of a society turns itself to the paper and tries to understand itself. It's not a preachy thing. I don't think any of this stuff is preachy. not fully, except in the next track.
Well, then let's dive in.
And
because that's the most controversial title.
Speaking of preaching, God is dead? ?
So God is dead.
God is dead.
God is dead.
God is dead. God
Is
dead.
actually
Is it?
is the single of the record, which surprised me when I looked it up.
Ooh,
Yeah.
controversial single. Love it.
I was surprised though because there were other tracks that sounded. It's hard with metal to say what sounds like a single because metal operates a little differently.
Me and John were just having this discussion on our way over here because metal, in many ways, is just a word to describe the aesthetic.
Yeah.
I think it's not really. I've actually mentioned this before in a previous podcast. It doesn't really allude to form at all. I don't
No.
think it form could be whatever it wants under the metal umbrella.
Yeah.
So sure,
There's-
pop, not pop, doesn't matter.
Yeah, the metal really. You need a thrashing guitar. You need one of two different voices. Ozzy's high pitched, screaming voice, or more of a thrasher, monstrous type voice. Really goes very well with metal. Those tend to be the two that they fall in. And aside from that thrashing guitar, you need a drum that can do a lot. You need a drummer that really can get complicated. That's a major factor.
That said, I want to take this opportunity to stress that I don't think this is a true metal record in every sense. I think there's a lot more southern rock going on here than there is actual metal. And it's true, yes, as you just described, metal is a very, very wide genre. And perhaps if you're just talking about the heavy, distorted guitars, sure. But there's this slow, trudging nature to this that feels very personable. It doesn't have that gritty, subcultural effect that a lot of other metal has.
Disenfranchised is a theme that's worked into a lot of metal.
But those themes that you're talking about are kind
All right,
of
no, I'll buy that.
are kind of a part of the culture of Black Sabbath, at least. I mean, look at
That's
what,
the thing. Black
Yeah.
Sabbath was at the forefront of that, so in many ways they influenced other metal artists to go out and seek the very type of music that I'm describing, when in many ways Black Sabbath has never really changed. They are exactly what they started with, so it's almost irrelevant to discuss that kind of thing.
And the reason we're discussing all of this because in God is Dead, we get a little bit of everything. You have a very, very slow intro that is really abruptly killed into a real primal, as Matt put it, a very primal beat.
And I do have to say, this intro, I liked it, even though it was still slow. It was kind of a creepy vibe. It was punchier and had more depth than the exposition of the very first track. The only problem is that it was very too short, and it got replaced by the following section.
and then
it didn't
they
get
go-
replaced, it was murdered.
and then they go right back into it after the intro is over for the verse.
Yeah, with the rebuilt with that slight primal nature.
But
of
it was
that
still very
breakdown.
similar to the intro, so it's like they almost could have lopped off that little intro bit and just get into it.
They did return to it once, but the thing is, I actually thought the retransition might have been a little bit better than the transition out of the intro. But, I don't know, I'm still not sure about the disconnect, considering the song. But the track itself, it doesn't really pick up, per se. It just changes tone a bit, and it still has this very slow, trudging nature, like it's trying to understand itself. And when you consider the title is basically a question.
I mean, it does go through stages, and the lyrics affect that too. It's kind of a simplicity in the beginning, and this kind of...
And that was the big issue I had with this song. In the beginning, I kind of just couldn't stand it because it hit that preacher level. It hit a guy on a pulpit just waving a Bible.
I didn't
And
feel that as much, though.
See, I didn't either.
But I liked it in the framework once I really heard the second and third verses after those choruses. It really became from an explanation of the fakers into a personal explanation of what's wrong into him being persecuted because of that belief.
See, I understand
I
that, where it
really
came
enjoyed
from.
that.
But even just going back to the beginning, the reason why it never even crossed my mind that it was, toward the preachy side is because I'm looking at the musical end of it. And the musical end is because it's so slow, it almost feels like it's meandering and trying to understand itself. That's why I never really feel like you can't be that aimless and yet be preaching something. I feel like that disparity would be too much for this track.
And honestly,
I wouldn't believe Ozzy would do that.
Honestly, with this track also, I think the reason I do like it so much, because when we were talking about it, I was trying to figure out why I liked it, because I remember liking it on the first listen. I think discussing it has reminded me, it's because it starts kind of lost and unfocused, and then builds, like lyrically it builds. And whether the music was a little repetitive or not, I really liked how the message and lyrics built.
I had the same exact experience, and let's face it, because of the trudging nature of it, and because the verse really is so repetitive, I mean, you can get a little bit bored by it, I feel, but it's a track that requires some patience when you consider the greater theme work at play.
And I really enjoyed the way the choruses were handled, because the first one ended with, "Is God alive or is he dead? God is dead." And I love the way they ended the second one, which was, "I believe God is not dead. God is dead." And it goes right into
great.
And it goes right into the lines, "To safeguard my philosophy until my dying breath, I transfer from reality into a living death."
That was my favorite line in the song, and to some extent the album.
And when that line was spoken, it solidified that whole theme work I was looking, and it just became great. It really it backtracked, fixed everything I thought was going wrong, and turned it on a dime.
And once you hone in on that stuff, you really get a sense of the emotion of the song, and how it starts out with this kind of being lost, not being sure, almost losing faith, and then maybe finding it again, but then also being persecuted for how you interpret and find your faith. Like, it actually, there's a lot more faith in this song than you initially realize.
Yeah.
If you gloss over it.
And it's cool. It's almost like...
It really is a song about faith.
It almost talks about how...
Which, with the title, you'd be like, duh.
Like,
well,
it talks about the dangers of having ideas outside the norm, which is just...
I think you might be stretching it a little bit there.
Maybe a little bit, but it's come on.
Well, let's put it this way.
They haven't done that in 20
I'm very
years.
inclined to stress the lyrics in this particular track, because without it, if you don't consider that theme work, I think it would be a little bit thin. Because there is a problem. There's going to be that split, when you get to the end of it. Because I'm sure a little bit more could have been done with this verse. But as we said, it works when you consider that it's a slow build. The problem is that the verse, not much is done with it. Like, except for a different drum fill here and there. Occasionally they'll throw in like a flat 6 in place of a flat 5. It's still a cycle. And, that cycle can wear on you. I feel a barren landscape here. It's a setting builder, even more so than the first track was a setting builder. But, by the second verse, I was like, I got it. It's good that they had the lyrics to balance that out, is my point.
Yeah, but sometimes that's how... I mean, there are a lot of cases with metal songs, or any kind of rock song, where sometimes it's more focused on the lyrics than the music. Sometimes songs just go that route.
Yeah, it all depends on the way in which it's phrased. In this particular case, Ozzy has such a present voice. You can't miss him.
Oh yeah.
That that's where I'm drawn to in this particular track.
Now, this song leads directly into our next track, Loner. Conceptually, it's following the theme work that was built in the previous song. I just feel like this song in particular was a miss on the album. And that is primarily due to two factors. One, I really was not enjoying breakdowns. I was not enjoying the way they were changing the theme work of the music. And two was the theme work itself, the actual music, was very repetitive in the beginning and kind of drew my ears away.
And that's kind of where I stand with this. I mean, you don't really have the lyrics to balance out and hit you in the face like the previous track does. So to me, this was like another repetitive riff, a little bit peppier, but not stirring in any way. And it kind of solidified the slow pace of this album overall. There didn't seem to be that, I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting for the build-up. I'm waiting for the rock out, and it's not quite happening.
Yeah, for me, this song, I mean, my big thing that I wrote was pleasantly average, which I'm still not sure if is good or bad to me. Like, I didn't hate the song. I didn't love it either. It was just kind of pleasantly average.
It's standard fare from Black Sabbath.
Yeah. It's insert Black Sabbath song, generic Black Sabbath song here.
That said, halfway through it, it does deliver. Only in a moment, but it delivers pretty well. Because the same thing I was talking about the drummer, like in the very beginning of this album, he'd throw in a little drum fill here
yes,
and there.
I know what you're talking about. He had a
And
big
then
drum.
in this, it's like someone splashed water on him, or he took a couple pep pills because he just woke up and went at it. You know,
yeah,
during
there was a definite drum solo here that stood
it was this
out.
little bridge where it just really picks up and followed by a pretty awesome instrumental too, and then it kind of returns and it goes back to the same verse, which is a little bit repetitive, and you know I kind of enjoyed the final outro also, but not in any overarching way.
Yeah, like I said, there's not really anything bad to say about this song, but not a lot of great things either. It was average. It was okay.
It's an average song with a great moment.
Yeah. So moving on, since there's not much else to say about Loner, to Zeitgeist, which is flat out, I'll say, at the top, my favorite song on the record.
This is the most creative track on the album, and that's putting it lightly.
Now, Zeitgeist, I gotta point this one out. Zeitgeist was used by a bunch of other bands for the names of songs.
Oh, it's
including,
very
I
common.
believe, Smashing Pumpkins.
Yeah, Zeitgeist is
Zeitgeist,
actually a popular song.
First of all,
name.
look at the word. It means the spirit of the age or the spirit of the time.
Yeah.
That's what it means, and it's very interesting considering the tone throughout this. Drastically different from anything else in this album.
This track has this kind of great haunting acoustic style that quickly kind of blends with this kind of almost Spanish-influenced guitar style.
Exactly. It's like a rumba almost.
Almost,
And that's the way it comes later. Just the intro, the experience of the intro alone is really something to behold. It's an acoustic guitar, yes, but I feel like it's doubled by an electric bass underneath, which gives it this deep rumble. Very awesome effect. And then when you combine that with a very sparse percussion, I believe it was a woodblock, combined with a bongo drum, but very sparse, just to provide like a very thin, loose rhythm. And it comes when all of this functions together. It's really kind of original.
Yeah.
This is the groundbreaking moment on this album, and it's very unlike Black Sabbath's previous work or anything else that metal is really doing.
I mean, but a lot of metal bands that I like have had standout kind of songs that didn't fit the perfect structure of metal. I mean, if you take Nothing Else Matters, the first time, that was on the Black Album, that was so different from Metallica at the time.
Of course,
Yeah.
but I think what really separates this from, the rest, everyone loves to have their different track. Hey, look, being different. This, it really had to do with imagery. It had to do with the setting that they put forth. It's almost the same barren landscape that we got in God Is Dead,
Right.
but it's to a whole much more believable degree.
But it
I'm
still
there.
fits.
I'm walking around.
It still fits the arc of the record, though, I think, very nicely.
And
Of course.
Yeah.
And it's from the very first words of this song. Astral engines in reverse, I'm falling through the universe again. Down among a dead man's vision, faded dreams and nuclear fission span. It's from the
Right.
get-go.
We'll replace barren landscape with astral plane.
Yeah, I mean, it hits...
It's ethereal. It's absolutely ethereal.
It's not even that. There's a sense of apocalypse.
Let's put it
True
this way.
wasteland.
This is the stuff that keeps metal interesting for me, and to some extent relevant, because it's as I started to say in the beginning, there's a lot of tropes out there for metal nowadays. If you're going to perpetuate the genre and move it in the next logical direction, you need to paint a picture. You need to use the instruments and the effects to really create something and put people in a place, not just deliver them, hey, we're going to thrash out. That's it. That's one thing, but that's only one thing.
I think that this song is the nice peppering on this album to... It doesn't bring the whole album to the next level, but it definitely shows that Black Sabbath has grown at least somewhat in the last 13 years.
The next thing about this track, and I think one of the most important things about the track, that really solidified this, I think is a 5-star song for me, to believe it or not.
I would agree
And
with that.
That's the the vocals. The
Yeah.
vocals particularly.
Ooh.
Ozzy was, I want to say, like,
His
in his the
syllable
top of his
work.
element.
In the syllable work at his the verses, like in the first verse when he hits the word again, there's just a little, I don't know, he messes
It's
with
a
the
bend.
timbre.
It's a
Yeah.
bend. I know
And it's
exactly
just-
the moment you're talking
it's
about.
It's just a fluttering aspect of it, and he holds it just a little bit longer than you used to, and it's great.
It's that kind of
It
motion
goes-
in his voice in this track.
It goes
This-
perfectly with that sultry nature of the Spanish guitar work. It's going perfectly with the very eerie qualities of the acoustic work. It's great.
This song is showing that Ozzy's still got the chops. It's showing that he's a vocal master and
It's
he can
scary
still
how
do
good
it.
He still is.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Favorite moment. I mean, during the chorus, he goes up to that high seventh, without any problems whatsoever, and then after that, he concludes the phrase with the very bend that you're talking about. It's really wonderful. It's almost bone chilling to some degree.
It perpetuates that haunting feel throughout the song from beginning to end. You get this kind of emptiness almost.
And speaking of the end, it was almost a callback to one of my favorite songs, even though it's played ad nauseum, Hotel California. It has one of those really smooth guitar with a dash of metal thrown in outros that it just perpetuates itself and just goes through movements.
I would buy that if it wasn't just for one thing. The fact that all of Hotel California is in major and it's just so happy and carefree and uplifting, and here I feel this dark grittiness that separates from me from making that connection.
That's where that metal comes in. That brings it a little more down to earth. That makes it that really takes it from the plane that it had created and smashes you back to earth, but does so lovingly. Yeah. It really does a great job. It's an incredible outro.
This also does one other thing that a few other tracks on this album neglect to do, and that's really spicing up the returns of verses, the returns of choruses, with, little things here and there that, in all honesty, can sometimes make the difference between a good track and a great track. It's little finer details. You have this, a little electric effect that actually does come in. It's sort of a synth that comps over the main riff. It's very subtle, as Matt said, almost Spanish, Latin. You actually do have maracas shaking in the background. That's when you combine all that, the type of rhythm at play. Really, I'm pretty certain is a rumba.
And you said there was a.
And then the outro that you're talking about.
You said it was you first thought of Floyd. I immediately went to Santana and
that was because
the
of the
Eagles.
scale that they were using. I'm sure both bands have gone to that. I mean, it seems like the soul of that era of rock to some extent.
Yeah.
That's why, again, this track, I can't put it in metal at all.
No, absolutely not.
This is, as we started to say, southern rock with a bit of a Latin twist.
Yes. And
I believe that some of the scales this track were also used by some of the bands that John's mentioning.
Yes.
That was the essence of the era, and I feel like they're throwing me right back there, and it still sounds fresh, it sounds new.
Yeah. And yet it still fits within the structure of the record because of where it takes you and how it makes you feel.
Exactly.
And it works really, I thought, fairly well with the next track, Age of Reason.
The idea of being a spirit for the century, for the decade, for the people of the time, this gets even more personified in Age of Reason.
Age of Reason is supposedly referring to the current age, and I guess this is our zeitgeist.
Yeah. And you get this sense, in his lyrics, the way he's singing, you get this sense of frustration with how things are. And immediately.
And what's great is it gets coupled with a real heavy chord progression.
Yeah.
A really heavy riff.
Strong guitar riff.
Strongest up until this point. And it really takes that, beautiful nature of the previous song and brings you back to reality. In a heartbeat, on a dime, right there. You're back.
This has the essence of metal for a specific reason, and that's form in this particular case. Even if you buy what I'd said earlier, that Black Sabbath really isn't metal per se, they're like their own brand of rock here and there. I'm not talking about the sound in this case. I'm not talking about the overall aesthetic. I'm talking about form. Going to what John said in the very beginning, that Black Sabbath tends to go through sections, like a section A to B to C, maybe even D. I wasn't feeling that much until this particular track. That's a very prog thing to do, actually, is just to go through different sections and then tie them together in a looser fashion than your typical verse-chorus structure. But I was hearing a verse-chorus structure all the way up until here, but this track, Age of Reason, completely breaks that. This truly is broken into specific sections, movements, as it were.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not into all of the movements.
And I agree.
The outro was stale, in my opinion. I felt like that outro had been done ad nauseum 1,000 times by heavy metal. I just really couldn't get on board with that.
Well, see, this is the thing. We're always, going back on ourselves because you got to look at all aspects here. Even the beginning had a little bit of a staleness to it, but I think I kind of bought it because of the track that preceded it.
I kind of bought it because I felt like this is... You want to set up a picture, that gets the job done. That intro gets the job done very quickly.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely buy that. It's a better riff than probably most of the riffs in this album. It's still kind of repetitive, but
it's a riff.
You don't harp on a riff when it's good for being repetitive.
It's not a solo. A solo, it means that you're going to be experimental. A riff is going to have repetition.
Exactly. And Black Sabbath makes use of that all over the place. They have this underlying riff that will sometimes last the entire track.
And it was really that B section that really, it added the complications that it needed to really start bringing it more forefront, for me to really start enjoying it. And that's when the lyrics really got heavy-handed again and got good again.
And this is probably my favorite form work on the album. It comes right after this. True, I wasn't as big in the very end, but there was this middle section where right after part 2, it goes into a transition, which is kind of this harsh, using that tritone again, tritone happy, and then moves into a very brief part 3 before going right back into that transition again to move itself out. That's a very prog thing to do, and it was moving at that point. Musically interesting.
And also completely changed the lyrical structure. That's the part that started with...
That's right, same
politics,
part.
Religion, love of money too. It's what the world was built for, but not for me and you.
Interesting.
Short, sweet, to the point, which is what that whole section was. And yet beforehand, in the B section, always felt that there'd be trouble. Mass distraction hides the truth. Prozac days and sleepless hours. Seeds of change that don't bear fruit.
Interesting.
I mean, he really is getting political in this one. Talking about the societal norms that we're going through. That he sees are wrong. I mean, I know Ozzy does this. I know Black Sabbath does this. It's really refreshing to hear. Yeah. And I really like the wordplay they're going on.
Well, it moves away from the tropes, that we were getting in the beginning. The stuff that we're used to. This is a little bit more relevant. This takes us, into a different place. It
takes us through stages, and like I said, I mean, even though the overall sense emotionally is frustration with the age, he kind of goes deeper in each section by taking you where the frustration lies.
And calling stuff out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing.
At the same time, though, I do also have a little bit of a critique with that this probably does end up being the preachiest track on this album. Where I didn't see that in the beginning, I do see that here. It's kind of the trade-off. You're going to tell it like it is, you got to be preachy. Not as big on that, but at the same time, it did achieve more. I enjoyed New.
I'm telling you right now, I believe this is a concept album.
That's a bold statement.
I see a
and
concept.
I had a feeling
here.
you're going to make that claim.
There's just so much connection between these songs.
But then again, when you look back at the Black Sabbath discography, don't you kind of see that throughout?
I don't know.
Is there something so specific to this album versus the rest that you could call this, a standoutish concept album?
Maybe not standoutish, but I feel it still hits the level of what a concept album would be.
I guess I can't really argue that.
More along the old school lines of rock opera, where it was telling a story. This one is more societal oriented, but it's got that kind of rock opera feel to it.
I still don't think it has the unifying factor, though.
I will say that, yes. Mostly because some of the songs just don't quite mesh. The ideas behind them do, but they don't quite hit the levels to keep the story going.
Right, and it doesn't hit the massive climaxes. Although there is a little bit of, I don't want to call it pretentiousness necessarily, but it's during the outro of this track that we both really weren't that big on. There's a solo here where a choir actually joins with the
Yeah,
solo.
I thought that was odd.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of implies that there is the people are speaking this message.
Yeah.
Not me, not Ozzy, but the people. It's, I'm iffy on choirs. They're the kind of thing that they either hit you or they don't. And when they come, they need to be the kind of thing that really does unify people. If you don't unify them, then the choir can seem like an elephant in the room.
It's just, I thought that...
An elephant with many voices.
It's just, I thought that the choir... I don't know, I don't think the choir ruined the song, but I don't think it was necessary. I think the song would have been as strong without the choir.
It's something to mention.
Yeah. But I mean, I think we're all in agreement the outro was a little disappointing comparatively to the rest of the song. But overall, it was a solid song. It wasn't anything terrible by any means, and there were some great messages and imagery in there.
No, it had the best display of form, I think, in this album.
And then we kind of go into Live Forever, which is...
And same sort of issues I had with Loner.
Yeah.
Yeah, even to a more extreme degree.
Yeah,
Live
it was
Forever,
worse here than in Loner, I feel.
Which really, this solidifies my idea. We were arguing over whether, is the beginning of this album better or is the end of the album this better? I really think it's just peppered throughout.
Yeah, there's good moments.
Yeah, and this one really is a bit of a drag. I couldn't come up with much to say about this.
Me
This
neither.
was the essence of Black Sabbath. It didn't offer anything groundbreaking within Black Sabbath. It was just, repetitive riff, fun, yeah, but
It was a Black Sabbath track. That
It
was
was-
about it.
I might have accepted it more in a concert venue.
It wasn't
Yeah.
just a repetitive riff. It was borrowed riff. They're borrowing from themselves here. And I can't get on board with that.
Well, but thinking about it, though, something to be said, they put Loner and Live Forever on opposite parts of the album, one towards the beginning, one towards the end. If you're going to put kind of filler tracks, it makes more sense to pepper them throughout the album than just stick them all together and kind of create a chunk or void. At least peppering them through, it kind of moves the album along. It's not great, but it gets you to that next place.
Depends. Absurd comparison right here because of the difference in genre. But, Paramore, that had the
with the
clump,
U,
the
yeah,
clump
with the-
that you're talking about.
yeah,
That was
yeah.
a very long album, 17 tracks.
Yeah.
And it had the clump that you're talking about. And I almost felt like with the strong tracks that they had at the very end,
Yeah.
it kind of worked. It comes back really hard. It almost gives you a breather, felt more like a concert experience.
Okay. I can see that. I mean, I don't know. I always like if there's going to be a puddle of generic to step in, I'd rather it be peppered throughout, but I can see what you mean with the Paramore album.
Interludes work best when spread out.
Yeah. And if you
I
think of
guess-
these generic tracks as kind of like really long interludes,
That's not the only example I have. I
understand. I think it can work either way depending on how it's done.
call it stage performance, whatnot. I do believe there's a little bit of that needs to be incorporated even onto studio work.
Oh yeah, I agree.
You
too.
have to enhance the experience. The highs and the lows. It needs to be kind of orgasmic to some extent. I think that's kind of a strong word for this album per se, but it needs to be very creative in where you place those highs and lows. The peppered throughout can sometimes seem like it's a little bit forced.
But I could see...
I feel the hand, in the aftermath. I feel the selection during the mixing of this album. I feel it like, ooh, that's a little weak. Let me put that there. Ooh, that's a little strong. Let me put a weak one after.
Two things. One, this took 13 years to produce.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Though?
Yeah.
13 years of continuous work?
13 years of on and off, going back to it, doing it again, going back to it, whittling it down, adding new concepts, yeah.
Because it clearly wasn't.
I don't think they were 13 years in the studio year-round. It was probably a month here, a month there, and then eventually became something bigger. At the same time...
Well, don't get me wrong. This is a good album, but it's not a 13 years in the making epic masterpiece
Well, there was
album.
also a lot of those years where Ozzy was not in a very good place.
And also keep
I
it.
know,
and
I
keep-
know, and I'm being sensitive to that fact.
And also
I'm just
keep in
saying.
mind, they're not saying that they called this album 13 because it's a 13-year epic waiting to come out. It just simply is representing the amount of time that it took them to get the album out. That's it.
They went through some
They
phases.
started in 2001. It came out in
well-
2013.
Okay, yeah, then it's relevant. I wasn't making any statement like, oh, it feels rushed, or anything. Obviously, that would be incorrect. It's just, I feel I feel the hand of the production master when in those cases.
The other thing I wanted to bring up was, for whatever reason, not a fan of Live Forever or Loner, but I could see this album being played straight through at a concert. I could also see Loner and Live Forever getting like 5-minute solos thrown in, just for fan service, just to
There were
bring...
even a couple of cool solos in this track, and I don't mean to put that down.
But I could see them
it's
actually
because...
expanding upon it in a live setting, big time, like hugely.
I accept that too. All these are good points, and I this is why I said from the beginning I think some of this would be better in the live experience. Just to throw it out there, they played recently, PNC Center, I believe.
Yeah, PNC Bank Arts Center.
And from what I hear, it was an amazing show.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they did things exactly like that.
Yeah.
And there's a listener we have, hi Larry, he actually went to the show, and he might be able to verify this stuff or not verify this stuff for us.
Well,
But-
feel free to comment on the website.
And
Larry.
at the same time, Live Forever just still wasn't up to snuff.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to
Yeah,
come
that's
up
the
with...
thing.
Yeah,
That's the real point. Just to put a period to the end of the sentence here. Live Forever. The problem is that the theme itself is too weak. Yes, there are cool solos, but solos don't have much meaning when you don't look at the theme. The reason I'm making my point about the whole concert experience is because it's not as important then. You're halfway into the solo and you're just like, man, this is great because they've extended it, they've doubled it, they're doing different things, they're experimenting. You've forgotten what the theme was to some extent. So whenever they wrap it around, it's like, alright, great. But in the short span of a studio album, it doesn't have the same punch.
Speaking of punch, Damaged Soul. This had my favorite guitar work of the album. It was the most charismatic, the most attitude-driven, and the most distinct guitar work within the metal framework.
And Steve
Well,
coined the term trudgery.
Trudgery. Well, the thing is, in many places in this album, I would consider it trudgery. That sounds like a negative term, though.
It's
It's
not.
part of the setting they're trying to create of a personal plight, and going with a lot of the theme work that John is talking about here. The searching for answers, that aspect. You hear
Yeah.
that in the guitar here, and also the same style of this guitar here, and that bass doubling. That's exactly like what we heard in Zeitgeist. So that makes Zeitgeist seem a lot more connected to the whole when you consider Damaged Soul.
Yeah.
Still kind of repetitive though,
A little bit.
places, but
I
in the same
enjoyed
way
it.
that the other riffs were repetitive. You just
It
kind of
was-
have to accept them or not.
But it was that distortion and bending of the guitar back and forth around the words that really, really made this damage, that made me feel that damage he was professing. Now, at the same time, we got almost B-movie lines talking about sin and death and destruction and being
Back to the tropes.
Satan's lapdog. Now,
Trudging of the Troops.
I'm not saying you can't do a song like that, but yeah, it was really trope heavy on the lyrics. Blood flowing rivers and all that ilk.
A lot of rain in this album.
Yeah.
References to rain.
Yeah.
Incidentally, that's
actually
how it ends.
Yeah, honestly, I really love the way this record ends. I
Oh.
think it's... And I'll get
It's
into
not,
why
it's
when
not
we
the
get
first
to it.
record to include rain at the end.
I mean, but it's gloom. There's a lot
Yeah,
of
there's a lot of
gloom.
gloom, and I like let's just get into it then, since I don't know that we have anything else to say about Damaged Soul.
No, I can
I thought this was one of the better solos because of the fact that it had different character to it.
Yeah,
It was a
absolutely.
lot grittier, using that same, trudgery.
And it had that monstrous outro, and that's the
Yeah.
best way I could do it.
It was a big finish.
It was a great finish. It really hit levels that a lot of the other outros just couldn't really compare to. It got big. It got really big.
Yet, to be honest, I think, it had two solos in a row. Let's,
That drum,
make a point of that.
That drumish solo followed by the guitar work solo.
Yeah,
Okay, the
kinda
interesting
launched it.
thing. This is the very interesting thing about the end of this track. I don't think we have much to say about the beginning of this track, but the end is really when this track takes off. It's the same gritty solo that I described earlier, which is the same part as that drum work. I think this is where the drummer gets to show off not virtuosity but creativity.
Right.
He's not shredding, if that you could use that term for a drum, but he does do that to some extent. In this particular case, he's playing sparsely. You know, he's over here, he's over there. It's all about texture. That's what I really, really enjoy in, music in general, to be honest. I love explorations of texture, because it takes you away from the very rigid, treachery of the track. You know, on one hand, you're just moving along, and the drummer's just there to keep with you and do cool things in the interim. But at this point, he breathes, and I love feeling that. The fact that he's doing it over the guitar solo, still just as impactful at the same moment, because it has that grit to it. Both going at once is, again, one of the better moments on this album. I think, to be honest, it beat the solo that followed it. Which is the big outro solo that you're talking about. I preferred the gritty.
But I think, I prefer the gritty also, but I think the larger-than-life outro...
You couldn't have ended there.
Yeah,
you had to provide something, and I think it was
this big finish was perfect for capping the song.
Well planned.
Yeah. Moving into Dear Father, which also was a track I really liked, this one had this kind of rubbing of the strings intro, which was kind of strange, but I don't know that there was supposed to be anything to it other than they just did it. I don't know that you're supposed to really look into that. The song had this kind of forlorn feel, and I thought it was a strong conclusion to the record.
This was another one of those A, B, C situations where the A really didn't offer anything new. It was a very Sabbath intro. We've already heard it 3-4 times on this record.
It's like I was at this place with track 3, and here I am again at the end. It's like starts off, oh yeah, it's Sabbath.
It had in the beginning. It had a very shallow verse section with the instruments. It had a great distortion in the chorus that did create apprehension. But
shallow instrumental or shallow
instrumental?
Oh, okay.
It had great apprehension in the chorus, that distortion that came from Damaged Souls and was redefined in Dear Father, but it wasn't really propagated enough in the verse instrumentation or the breakdowns in the beginning of the song. It got better.
It had a nice playful slide introduction.
It got better, and it has... might be the best lyrics on the album towards the end. Like the outro of this song, the center core and the outro really did bring the whole album together. I felt like it did a great job of summing it up.
Quite a claim there. Best lyrics on the album.
It was this specific line: "Preacher of theocracy, hiding your hypocrisy under false sanctity, holy phony empathy." I just I love that wordplay.
Even if there's anyone out there who doesn't quite buy the meaning or this or that, the other, it's great writing, and this is something that I think I don't see too frequently in a lot of the albums that we review. Is all right, great, yeah, you're speaking to me, man. You know, you hear a lot of lyrics in that vein, but you don't hear truly great writing, like using the English language as an instrument of its own. Playing rhymes off the other, using a lot of alliteration, and just making it almost within one single phrase or one verse. Having that a mini... how to put it? Like a mini story that echoes the track as a whole.
Okay.
The form of that one lyric echoing the form of the entire track.
I understand.
And I feel like that lyric does it.
Yeah,
like, I feel
definitely.
That. To a
it's
greater
2 lines.
extent,
It's 2 measly lines, but it's brilliant.
To a greater extent, I feel like it actually, right there in those 2 lines, punctuates the entire album, and the entire theme of the album. Just does an amazing job of summing up what they're doing.
And that's why I feel like the actual outro, which is just Falling Rain, is really a great way to end the record, because
it's not just Falling Rain, it's Falling Rain, a little bit of thunder, and church bells.
And it's just it wraps up that kind of haunting, desperate, lonely feeling with this punctuated story.
With this calling out nature of the lyrics, it does a great job of finalizing this product.
I think it's a great way to conclude the record. Maybe not the best, but definitely a great way.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. It wasn't the best song. It really wasn't, but it just had some words. This isn't the only part. It just had some words that just really did.
I think it just really
This
wrapped
is
up
an
the
album
album.
that requires patience. You really have to wait around for the moments, even if the whole isn't going to grab you.
That is true. That is very true. There are parts where you're just going, oh, it's Black Sabbath. Oh, it's metal. But then it goes into something that goes, just... Wait, did I hear that right? Did he say what I said? Think
Exactly.
He said? Did he hit those beats I thought I heard?
But let's be clear, just because their tones are kind of negative...
That's not negative, it's incredulous.
Right. Oh, fair. Okay, so for once I'm not incredulous. But the point is that their tone dictates, oh, it's just Black Sabbath. It's Black Sabbath!
Yeah.
Like, even the not as good is still good.
Okay. On one hand, yes. When it comes to solos, of course, yes. They're very skilled guitarists in there. The drummer, session musician, they got very skilled. No one is questioning virtuosity, but I do have an issue with writing here and there on this
Right.
album.
Which I think is a fair judgment.
Writing, like, there are certain riffs here and there which I just think are not that good. They can sometimes feel like hand-selected from any metal album throughout the 80s.
Right.
You know? You could take them, you could write them in a minute, you repeat them for the rest of the song, and then, yes, you can do creative stuff around that. But you provided yourself with a very easy framework to work with. This is only in some cases, not in all cases here.
I think that's partially because after taking such a long hiatus, they want to make sure everybody knew it was Black Sabbath.
Agreed.
They wanted to... It has a slight aspect of fan service.
And if
It
they're...
does. It definitely
And if they
does.
have intent to do another album in a shorter period of time after this one...
I would love to see where it goes.
Right, because this might have been a reintroduction, and the next album will be that evolution that we're looking for, maybe.
That's what I always love to...
Hopefully it's not called
To hope for.
14 and takes 14 years to make. Hopefully it's called Next Tuesday or something like that, and we just get something great from Ozzy.
Well, if that's the case, he would be in his 80s.
Yeah. Well, with any luck, it comes out in a year or
That
two.
said, we haven't mentioned this. Ozzy's voice really doesn't sound any different than it had
We did
30
mention
years
it
ago.
earlier.
Did we mention
But
it?
yeah, no, he really hits,
I
he's hitting
had
this-
said that he was at the top of his game, but
Oh, he absolutely is. His voice
I
sounds
really
great.
hear nothing different.
No,
Yeah,
he's
absolutely.
Ozzy.
Yeah.
He has not changed.
His voice
That's
changed from the very early Black Sabbath years to the mid-Ozzy years, like the early Ozzy solo years. But after that, his voice stayed the same.
Right.
His voice has not changed since.
And I'm
He
sorry,
hits-
but Zeitgeist epitomizes
His
that very
ability.
specific,
skill.
the specific skill that he has, and the emotion behind it. Because let's face it, even though the skill was there in a lot of these tracks, I wouldn't hear the emotion in every single instance. Sometimes it would just be more exposition, describing the lyrics in a very virtuosic manner. Well, not virtuosic. It's the Ozzy brand of virtuosity. But
Right, one of Ozzy's two defining skills. The other is biting the heads off of small animals.
of course,
That's not very... No. That's terrible. He wears mascara like a god.
That's true.
That's a strong one. But yeah, it's the emotion that really grabs me, and I think
Yeah.
that
And it's there.
There are melodies that he writes here and there, and Zeitgeist is certainly my favorite melody on this record. And for as much as I go on about instrumentation, I'm sorry, but melody sometimes can be the core and soul of
Yeah.
an entire track.
Absolutely. And this album
Mel-
is very emotional.
It should be by all means, but in many cases it's not. Let's face it. Sometimes people write shitty melodies. It happens.
Yeah. But for me, like, also with this album, it's an emotional album, but for different reasons. It's not overwhelmingly personally emotional. I feel like it's more of an emotional record where it brings you into this movement that this album's going through. And you become a part of something.
And that's where I would like to start my wrap-up. Because I mentioned it earlier, I felt there was a concept growing here. And the concept, I feel like it's dual. It's the journey that Ozzy went through, and it was very publicized. We saw him in some fairly dark years over this past decade and a half. He went through stuff.
Well, society loves to take a fairly unique and seemingly off-the-wall character and posting them everywhere.
But
It's
we know that a lot of this is true because of what his family has said, he has said. He's gotten himself cleaned up, and I feel like he's working out his demons on this album. At the same time, I feel like he's using it as a forum to comment on what we've been doing since 2000. Where we're going, what freedoms we're giving up, what ideas we're accepting as the norm that we shouldn't be. I feel like there's enough of that in this album to really call it a concept album. And while musically it's not the highest of levels, but it's really darn good. The worst parts are merely average of this album. Like,
That's true.
Loner. Loner is really the worst song in my opinion, and it's a 3-star song. It's a very take it or leave it type song, and nothing really hits 3-star other than that. So
I might push Loner and Live Forever in the 2 range, to be honest. There's very little.
I feel like they're good enough to be on any metal album.
Yeah,
And-
but who wants to be on any metal album?
That's
this is the thing. You know, I walk through a lot of record stores, and sometimes you see the metal section. It's sometimes the biggest section in the store because there are so many bands came out of late 80s, 90s, and still to this day, although not quite as many, that wanted to follow in that subculture, as it were. The very gritty, off-the-wall,
darkness.
thrashing, enjoying the power of music as opposed to just, the melodies or this or that,
or trying to get a point across.
not being a pansy. Let's
Exactly,
put it that way.
yeah.
That's the well, I guess the popular impression of a lot of metal. And the fact of the matter is, when you have that much of an influx, it becomes so. It makes you believe that anybody can do it. And the fact of the matter, there's only a few greats out there that have managed to achieve that and really give you those bone-chilling moments. A lot of the smaller guys, they're just out there to have fun. There's nothing wrong with that. It's great in a local band setting. But as you go through these record stores, you look from one cover to the other, and it's just, biblical theme after biblical theme after biblical theme after... Like, this is where we get the idea of tropes. And then you listen to the music work, and it's just, rehashed of the guy who came before, and then the guy who came before that.
Well, that's
it's
because
an endless
that's
line.
content. That's really what it boils down to. Content and ability to write lyrics.
Yeah.
And here, content, I'm really enjoying the content. I'm really enjoying what they're trying to say. And I'm really, really enjoying the reinvigoration of Black Sabbath lyrics. Because that was one of their best qualities from day one. Was their wordsmithing. I gotta give this album... I was gonna rate it so much lower until I really picked apart the words. I gotta give it a 4. It is a 4-star album. This really is it's a really solid, great metal album. It's not awe-inspiring, world-changing, but it's damn good.
For me, going to this album, I'd heard a few people talk about it, and they were like, it's Sabbath, whatever. Which I got a sense of. But for me, I put this album on expecting to hear Black Sabbath, and lo and behold, it's exactly what I heard. There were some defining, bone-chilling moments. Zeitgeist, hands down, we all agree, is the song on the record. It's bone-chilling. The lyrics are great. The melody is great. The fact that it's so different from everything else makes it stand out, which makes it the perfect paradigm on the album. I like every track, though. Loner and Live Forever are forgettable, but not because they're bad, not because they're great, they're just okay. They're okay tracks. I disagree, Steve. I don't think they're 2 tracks. I think that they're 3, they're average. They're just like any, other average band. We've talked about the kind of skill level that those... In fact, I think there's still more skill level here than half of the average artists we've reviewed. However, getting to the point of the wrap-up, because we've kind of talked to death how we feel about the record.
We always talk to death, though.
Yeah, well, that's also true. There are no finer points I can bring up than Ozzy's at the top of his game. Vocally, he's never sounded better. He just sounds as good as he always has. So, I mean, that's enough to take me through this record and make me enjoy it. On top of the great solos, and then the good solos, and the fun drumming. I mean, you're right. The drummer had moments of pep here and there, and then they splashed water on him on a track or two where he really took off. That really engaged you. I'm with John, but I think I liked it a little more. I'd give it a 4.1. I think it's a little better than a 4. I really liked it. You know, the tracks that you think are 2s, I don't think are bad enough to drag it down for me. I wanted Black Sabbath and I got it. And then I got some more of that with Zeitgeist and parts of Dear Father and Damaged Soul. So, it's a 4.1 for me.
Alright. Well, it comes down to this. This album, it has a lot of fan service. And I did not come into this expecting Black Sabbath to stop being Black Sabbath. They made their name that way. Why should they stop being Black Sabbath? That said, though, there are a lot of people who really do push the boundaries in their career and constantly are looking for different ways to reinvent themselves here or there, or taking the theme work that has defined them and moving that in a different direction. And that's just what's a little bit lacking here. So yes, in that sense it is average, but there are a couple of other little things that bother me, and that really does come down to the music writing in the main verses, chiefly in the verses, some of the choruses. And it's just that I find a lot of them to be kind of trivial, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. They don't move me in the same way that a lot of other metal music has moved me. It does it like, a little bit of give and take. It doesn't quite have the power that a lot of other music has, but it also doesn't quite have the level of emotion. This is what I mean by writing. It's not that the technicality itself is out, although actually in some cases I do think they could have done a lot more with certain ideas. So actually, even the technicality itself is a little bit subpar. Even for Black Sabbath. Again, I can't not compare it against the big ones. I think that's where we're really gonna... We started off by saying, it's impossible, but who says it's impossible? It's not. I know they're capable of War Pigs. I know they're capable of Iron Man. It's just... I wanted, in some sense, the modern equivalent, which could be absolutely nothing like that. I don't want a rehash of those two tracks, but I wanted something that still kind of exploded.
But what's to say Zeitgeist wasn't that thing?
Zeitgeist...
Because those tracks were single tracks on albums that those were the standout tracks on those albums.
Agreed. Well, I've never looked back and rated those albums, so that's a moot point. When it comes down to it, yes, Zeitgeist is incredible, and there are other moments of other tracks that are incredible. I also do agree with John, the theme work, the idea is incredible. I think that if it was not for those things, this would be a lot more in the lower 3s, because it does have those things that push it in the upper 3s for me. But there's just a lack of cohesion for from one track to the next. It's just I can't give it a 4. I need to give it 3.9. I was gonna rate it lower, to be honest. This is as bad as I can't bring it to a 4.
Acceptable.
So the overall wrap-up rating is
4 stars.
Yeah, averages out of 4 stars. Definitely listen to it. Don't miss this album. If you're a metal fan, and especially if you're a Black Sabbath fan, definitely go listen to this record. If you're a Black Sabbath fan, go buy it. You're going to like it.
Yeah, if
you're a Black Sabbath fan, just go buy the record. If you're a fan of metal in general, definitely listen to it. Even if you're not a fan of metal, check it out. I mean, I was listening to it with Sarah over the weekend, and she's not really a huge metal fan, and she actually really liked the record.
Well, neither am I.
Because,
to be honest, I'm not a big metal fan.
But it had enough to pull you in.
Yeah. I'll be frank.
I thought you were John.
I'll be frank this time. I'm not hugely into this album. There are instances that are just great.
You're making concessions for the poetry and the
big
theme.
Time for the poetry. I'm hooked on these lyrics, and that was the big thing that really made Black Sabbath Black Sabbath and makes bands hit the next level. For me, it was always been the poetry they're able to infuse.
Well, yeah, I think, to be honest, what really would have pushed it to the 4 for me? It's if the music matches it. Zeitgeist is just one track. it matched it beautifully there. It was
There
was
are-
a wonderful 5-star track.
And there's just parts in the other songs where they finally hit that meshing point.
Exactly.
All
Parts, and sometimes not even. Sometimes I hear it just in the words and not in the music at all. The music is still very much akin to Black Sabbath's usual stuff. It's just them rocking out. It's fun, but there's a I want the it factor.
Okay. Well, that's acceptable. And that is our wrap up. So, yeah, go buy it. Just go buy it. It's Ozzy. Next section. We talked about this last week. I want to
Full
discuss,
force.
and Steve jumped on this big time when I was in the car driving here, and he was all like, "Oh, that's a great idea," and I was like, "Yeah,
It's a
my
miracle we
idea."
hadn't thought of it earlier.
Yeah, how are instruments treated by genres, and even to some extent by people in general? What do we see when we look at an instrument? When we hear a tone struck, are we automatically going to hear a clicking noise and think, oh, that's part of rock and roll? Are we going to hear a riff and think, that drum has to be jazz?
Right.
And can we accept it when it's not in that framework? And that's a big, big aspect of music, is we call genres because they all sound a specific way because of the instruments they're using.
Sometimes because of the instruments they're using, and sometimes because of the way the instruments are played. I think that's going to be the point of contention during this as we go through the instruments. We went through an intro last week. I want to forego that completely. I want to jump right into the thick of this and start throwing out instruments and discussing them.
Violin.
I was just going to pick it.
This is the be all end all instrument because of what the violin.
Well, we end up
does.
bookending this discussion with the violin.
Because the violin's got a bunch of cousins associated with it, everywhere from the upright cello,
And they even
I'll give
upright bass to the fiddle. The violin at its core is something special.
I'll give a little history here. We know it as a classical instrument primarily. First of all, orchestras are composed of a bunch of violins. Many of them in a row, because there's something about when the way they combine, it's a beautiful mid-range to high sound that just sounds so epic when doubled and doubled and doubled again. There's something about the string, when bowed across it, using horsehair, that it's meant to mimic the human voice.
Yeah.
So when you have an orchestra, it's meant to mimic a choir. And then when you have a solo violinist, it's meant to mimic a single person singing, which is why there's so much, and that's why I think that chill goes down our spine when we hear a violin in anything, a single violin playing over a general moderate background music thing. You're not meant to focus on anything else except the violin at that point. It grabs you by the throat almost. You can barely even speak after it's heard.
And that's truly why I think it's very well utilized in the rock bands that are out now that use it properly. And I mean, one of the bands that I've always listened to that really used, I think, the violin in a proper way in a rock setting is Blue October. They used it like that. It wasn't in the background kind of just disappearing. It was the singer stops singing, the violinist gets a violin solo that mimics this style of singing.
Right.
That suits the song.
And here's the
But-
thing,
Yeah.
I think that modern rock music is not so different from classical in that regard. I think they want to use violin in the same exact way that classical used it. They want it to grab you. But the one thing that throws it all asunder is country. Because when you hear a violin as a fiddle, that's the reason we seem to call it a whole different instrument. I have had so many people over the years ask me, what's the difference between a fiddle and a violin? Nothing. It's the way it's played. And that's what it seems to almost shatter this argument. Because there's something about when a fiddle is played that is just, it's contrary. It's not like a single person singing. It's a jig. It's a dance. I see feet on the floor. I don't see a soloist calling out in longing.
But that's something I feel like that longing has been the focus of what rock and roll does with the violin. Go back to Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles. That was when violin became a rock instrument. That song, and it's really,
and that's a classical.
Yeah, and it's very melodramatic. It's very sad. That's what violin became for the longest of times. Something like Blue October, or someone we talked about last year, Flowbots, Circle and Square. Circle and Square replace the guitar with a violin. That conceptually is a brand new idea. No one did that on such a macro scale of an album. Those are the oddities.
But I'm not
Most
even
of the
sure
time-
that's an oddity, because when you consider it, the guitar is like the rock equivalent of a violin from the get-go.
No, but allowing the violin to take that step is different. Because for the most part, from Eleanor Rigby to like Bittersweet Symphony, the violin can do two things. It can be sad, it can be love. And it's hard for it's not really readily allowed to break that framework.
Except in country.
Well, I mean, I'm talking specifically rock and roll.
Okay, all right.
I'm talking
All right,
within rock and roll.
within that.
Within
all right,
rock and
we'll
roll,
talk
they
about
don't. It doesn't get allowed. Not often enough.
first.
And yeah, in country, well, it can really only be fast and high strung and high chords and excitement.
You know, even in classical, it was able to hit the exciting for a while. Bela Bartok used to use
Flight of the Bumblebee.
well,
Everybody
actually,
can
yeah, of
immediately
course, even
think of
that as well.
And that's the perfect example of a violin being energy, pure and simple.
Not Bela Bartok, by the way, but a more well-known example, Flight of the Bumblebee, certainly.
I'm drawing from
Yeah.
my very limited knowledge of classical music.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, it's and it's true. There would seem to be, I think the folk tradition wanted the violin used for a more fun purpose, because the folk tradition comes from small towns. That's why we call it folk. The folk people, people who live in little hamlets here and there.
And the
And
music-
what do they do for fun? Like traditionally, going back hundreds of years,
They come
together, in a great hall. They have a nice big dinner and they dance. Like
And they
this,
have community-oriented thing, and
Exactly.
high energy promotes a sense of community. That's how it translated through the ages.
Yeah, it's
It's only
interesting
recent.
that
It's only
violin
the last-
was able to take that turn.
Yeah, it's only the last 60, 70 years that violins was used outside of classical setting
That's true.
and folk. That it
That's
really
true, and
got
it was-
new blood.
Jazz had never really discovered the violin in the early 20th century.
Swing didn't have it.
Modern jazz does have violin.
Well, yes,
but
of
modern anything has anything, and that's
Yeah.
why we're having this discussion now, is because it seems to be so relevant. Let's put the violin on hold for a minute. Do you have anything else to say on it?
No, but I want to talk about our next instrument,
Okay.
drums.
Percussion. First of all, in the families of instruments here, violin is of course part of the string family, and in many ways to discuss those other instruments are just to discuss them in different registers. Like, for an upright bass, you picture more of a large baritone man, so it's relevant here. But percussion is very, very interesting, because the timbre of percussion is all about striking. It's actually a very violent affair, when you consider, in almost every single instance. But it doesn't have to be if you strike it just a little bit. The thing is that as you go across a song that has a lot of percussion in it, it holds you. It is probably the only thing that can hold you because of that striking, even when it is very, very soft. It's the only thing that keeps tempo. Without drums, it's actually very hard to keep tempo, and I think that's the thing that turns people away from a lot of classical music, is because they don't have that tempo to hold them. The instruments are keeping tempo with a conductor who's a silent man standing in front of all of them, and you have to feel the percussive nature of those other instruments as they're mimicking percussion. But you can't ignore a drum. A drum is always the elephant in the room.
But the whole thing is, I feel like because of how primal a drum can be, because of how integral a drum is in modern genres, that when you create jazz, when you create rock, when you create pop, you have a drum to work with, a drum tone, a specific area that you can actually do with the drum.
And this is my one...
And it's really pigeonholed.
It is pigeonholed. This is my one big problem
This is
with
why
the
drum
set in
machines
general.
exist. They created a computer program to do what drums do because they're so pigeonholed.
There is a rock drum setting. There is a hip-hop drum setting.
Yeah.
Jazz drum setting, all these different things. The rock drum setting... rock drum
Beat.
beat or make, the 5 drum set right? You
Yeah.
got this has been in place since the 50s and long before, but the pigeonholing I think started in the 50s with early rock. You know, it was just a nice, easy thing for everyone to attach themselves because you got everything you need, really. You got your bass drum. All right, there, that's bass. You got your tom toms. That's more for the mid-range stuff. The snare adds a little bit of echo, right? And then the crash cymbal. Well, who can ignore a crash cymbal? And the hi-hat, which is a little bit more of a controlled cymbal.
Right.
Because you can actually, patter it instead of just bam.
Right.
And you don't really move out of that for a really long time. Like, even cross genres, metal kind of adopted the same exact thing. And they used it, alone for a while. And then finally, metal decided to get absurd, and they would double everything that I mentioned, and then some, which gives you absurd
double
numbers.
and triple bass drums, which are just ridiculous.
Or bands with multi-drummers.
Yeah, some bands have
another
two
big
drummers.
thing.
Right.
But
This is why I really enjoy the last 20 years of drum work, because they've explored all the other things that drums can do.
They got-
texture, just
they
as
got
I was
different.
describing earlier with Black Sabbath.
But the whole thing is, a drum is in every style of music we're working in now. Just about. Drums are everywhere. But you can always tell the difference between a rock drum, a hip-hop drum, and a pop drum. You can hear it by itself, and you will be able to guess fairly accurately what type of music it's going to make.
In fact, this is one of the reasons, because drum is so prevalent nowadays, it's actually, in my opinion, the only reason why more pop-oriented people have been able to dip their toes back into classical, is because it's becoming very common now for single classical instrumentalists, very well-known virtuosos, no matter what they're good on. If the violin, they'll play an amazing violin solo with maybe sometimes a backing orchestra, but what's going to be over it?
Drum.
This is so common. To some extent, it can be a little bit tacky, because it's like superimposing pop with classical. It's like, let's see what happens when they mesh together, but it can also be very creative. The only problem is that, I do have an issue that modern society seems to require drums, period.
Well, also, I like it when, going back to what John said about having multiple drums being also a very modern thing, there are some bands that even have different forms of percussion within the same band. I.e., for example, Guster uses a drum set and a bongo set. And that makes a very different sound.
That was the most standoutish thing on this record, Zeitgeist.
Yeah. Was having that
was
different
that
kind
little,
of
little bongo and a wood block, right? This
Yeah.
is that's the baffling thing. Why drums should have been pigeonholed for so long. They're so flexible.
I need more cowbell. Yeah, that was innovative when they started using a cowbell. It's kind of a shame, but I have to be honest.
No, it is a shame that someone should look at that as groundbreaking.
Yeah.
But that just shows how
And it's
pigeonholed
kind of-
the drum set has been.
It's you know what? It's sad that we really do gear ourselves towards certain sounds just the drum to make certain genres of music.
Well,
but at the same
I
time,
think it comes down to the fact that humans are creatures of comfort.
yeah, but at the same time, there are certain drummers out there who are just divine gods that can take the framework of punk and turn it into something that's just pure magic with the drums.
These are the cross-genre people. These are the people who borrow from one influence, and they were like, you know what, I'm done with this genre. I'm going to leave it for a while, but I'm going to use that influence and join a whole other band. A band with other instrumentalists who are used to a whole different kind of thing.
Or
this
they
is
can
how
even-
we get the most
they can
innovative
even
stuff in music.
They can even stay within their genre and just know how to experiment.
Exactly. It's really all about having a good ear, about listening to what your writers are doing, because often the drummer is not writing the music, but it's being intuitive.
Well, that's why also I think a band like Slipknot was kind of so harshly recepted in the beginning, because their first record, they had a drummer. Then they had a guy who just banged on pots and pans. Then they had a guy who had a bongo, I believe. They had multiple percussionists that weren't just there to keep time of the song. And that's why, besides their big single, Wait and Bleed, which was very radio-friendly and kind of had a percussion beat, some of their other songs were kind of more off the wall and kind of all over the place. Which, if you could embrace it, you heard something very different and very unique.
Yeah.
Whereas some people were just like, oh, this is crap, because to them it was noise because they didn't know what to do with it.
It's all about executing it, tastefully. Is really what it comes down to. I'm all for bringing in even other, throwing in like a timpani, the most epic, deepest drum sound that actually was used in the classical stage, and bringing that into rock music.
Yeah.
Not every rock musician has a timpani on hand, though. That's sometimes logistics.
I would love to see a picture of that.
Oh, it's a kettle drum. That's just another
Oh,
word for
one
a
of
kettle
those.
drum.
Yeah, it's kettle drum. Or
Huge.
Well, you know what's one of the coolest aspects of New York? Subways. We have a great subway system. You ever been down there?
Oh yeah.
And I'm not speaking to you guys. I'm speaking to the listener.
You're right.
I know most of the people who listen to us are probably New York area or city-oriented area. There's something really magical about a dude with a water can and a cement mixing can and a pair of sticks doing something special on the drums.
I agree, and it also has to do with acoustics, because, man, when they're doing it down the subway, there's something very special about the acoustics of the subway system. Because how often do you get to play in an area that has a seemingly infinite long tunnel,
Yeah.
and thousands upon thousands of steel beams hanging down? When you're playing, I'm talking about the performers who are right, not on the mezzanine, right there on the subway platform itself. And just to hear it echo across four sets of tracks, off to the other side, off every single beam, it's astounding.
One of my favorite things to hear in the subway was, this was years ago, I don't think it was recently, I think it was a couple years ago. It was one of the larger platforms, so think 34th Street or 42nd Street, where there's like 4 tracks and two different sides. I'm on one end, and there's a saxophone player on the other far end, at the opposite end. The way the sound echoed through the entire tunnel, it almost sounded like multiple saxophone players.
And
I think you just chose our next instrument.
Yeah, that's perfect, because the
And it was
saxophone...
gorgeous.
All right, we've touched a string, we've touched percussion. Now let's touch a woodwind. Although saxophone is a very interesting one, because it's actually a combination brass and woodwind.
Brass? Yeah.
It's woodwind because there's actually a reed.
Right.
Most brass, it's actually just a tube at the end, and they have to kind of purse their lips in order to do it.
You go up against the thing, and you kind of like make out with it, and it just...
Exactly, and it's very disgusting, actually. It's very spitty.
Well, the woodwinds would be...
That's why they have spit traps.
The clarinet
Right.
and the saxophone being the two most prolific. Now, a saxophone, specifically the standard sax, not the multi-sax we got into last week, but the standard regular sax that everybody thinks of, I feel like... Okay.
This is pigeoned into jazz, in my opinion.
No, I feel like a saxophone can't be anything but sensual.
Sensual or romantic.
Okay,
yeah.
I've heard this, especially from women. I'm just gonna go out and say that. No degree of sexism, but without dodging around every single woman who I've ever met says that their favorite instrument is the saxophone. And I'm sorry to any listener who that's not the case for. It's just, I'm astounded by this prevalence.
I think that's primarily because not a single male has ever bought a Kenny G album. There's that.
Well, then again, that's presuming that you think Kenny G is the epitome of saxophone play.
Yeah, but that's what most people think of.
He played a soprano sax. It's a really weird looking thing.
Anyway,
Kinda tinny.
saxophone, I mean, it's just the sounds a saxophone can make outside of jazz is usually relegated to the deeper, more rumbly noises, which just purr.
Well, yeah,
I actually think because the range is so high, the range is pretty high for a single-lined instrument. That is to say, something you can't play, multiple notes on, like a piano. Yeah, it can go pretty high and pretty low. I think it's that dynamic quality that enables it to be so sensual.
Well, think about, one of our best examples of the most cliche form of saxophone. The intro track to Robbie Williams' record that we reviewed earlier this year. Or that was last year. Whenever that was.
All right.
That you didn't
Episode 32.
You didn't like that saxophone because it was gimmicky. But the fact that it was quintessential saxophone is what made it gimmicky.
That may have very well been the first track, I think.
Yeah. But
you want to verify that, audience? Yeah, episode 32, "Take the Crown" by Robbie Williams, very first track. I forget the name of the track, but yeah, it threw it in. It threw it in kind of,
and all it was there to do was be sensual and romantic. That was the only purpose it served.
And that's, I think, where I really take issue with it. It's just like
it was very cliche use.
Exactly. It's like proving the rule. I want exceptions to the rule, and that was almost to like slap you in the face.
But here's the other thing that I've noticed with what saxophone I know of. If it's working with the melody, it's not allowed to hit high notes because of the jarring nature.
Is this presuming that the saxophone is the melody, or that there's another melody that the saxophone is playing
either
over?
it's playing with the melody. Now in jazz, when a saxophone goes solo, I mean it goes solo. It will reach amazing heights. Anybody knows Rhapsody in Blue. It's magic. It can do such amazing emotional feelings. But you know what? When it's actually trying to mesh up with other instruments, it just can't reach those same heights.
That's funny. Saxophone wasn't the most standout instrument to me in Rhapsody in Blue.
Actually, that was what I really latched on during the Rhapsody.
There's a lot of instruments in Rhapsody in Blue. I'm curious to know what section that was. That's something to talk about afterwards. Maybe post in a comment. But, that's one application. And yet, when I'm thinking about sax, I'm thinking about the jazz gods. And there's only one name that comes to mind, and that's John Coltrane.
Of course.
John Coltrane, in my opinion, is the idol for any saxophone player out there. He is the singular virtuoso. And I'm sorry, but when he's playing, you shut up. Like, you just listen to him.
But that's what I'm saying. It's jazz.
That's jazz.
Jazz allows...
it allows a degree of flexibility, because I wouldn't say that every single note that he played was always sensual. Yes, maybe the main theme is sensual, but we talked about this last week during the Chick Corea album, that jazz has sometimes very brief themes and very long solos. And over the course of that solos, you're probably going to hit a lot of emotional... of emotions, period.
Just the piercing nature of the saxophone can be angry.
But I think the saxophone...
Yeah.
I think the saxophone, more so than
Angry
maybe...
love.
more so than maybe the violin, when it's used in anything but jazz, is very pigeonholed and very cliche.
Yes.
I mean, there's not a lot of examples I can think of where the
thing.
saxophone stands out. Like, think about even the 80s songs, like, Who Can It Be Now? Like, the saxophone is... all it's doing is mimicking the lyrics. That's it.
You mentioned a really strange one, because I, for some reason, accepted it in Men at Work.
So do I. I accepted it, but it's still not being very...
I'm very glad you brought that up.
It's not being very unique. It's mimicking the lyrics.
It's true. At the same... I don't know, maybe it had something to do with the way in which Men at Work's stuff was mixed.
Well, and also think about Men at Work...
It had I think this is important for saxophone. Reverb.
Yeah.
In other words, it needs to sound like it's in a hall or something. A saxophone cannot sound constricted. Otherwise, I feel like you're missing the whole point of including it.
But I think also, even though it was kind of cliche in Men at Work, the reason it worked for that was because they were purposely mimicking the lyrics. They were permanently
There's also
purposely mimicking the lead singer.
Those peas really started messing with you.
I need to go to sleep. Is what's happening here. So
I got our next one, and this is one I didn't. I want to go into the brass section.
All right.
Trumpet.
Trumpet's the one you picked out.
Because the trumpet...
Well, it's the most well-known.
Well, it's the most common, and it's got a bunch of dual natures. It's got a very distinct sound. It's one of the most distinct sounding instruments in an orchestra. Because there's just so much range it has, and it's so high-pitched, it's immediately recognizable. Or the brass in general tends to be very immediately recognizable. But I want to compare ska and jazz, and they are really the ones that prolifically use the trumpet.
If we're going to look at the big ones, let's take Louis Armstrong then.
Yeah.
He's the one we all know from jazz.
But what you find with the trumpet and ska is, sometimes it becomes more of a melody instrument, but it's one of the few instruments that, while it doesn't hit a lot of genres, is used the same way. It's given freedom.
Well, that's a very interesting point, because considering we just followed up the saxophone, I feel that the saxophone has a little bit more freedom than the trumpet, believe it or not. I think the trumpet, because it sounds... It's derived from a fanfare, like a bugle. It has an inherent military feel to it, which I feel is best served in the company of other instruments. Playing in tandem.
The thing about the trumpet is that it doesn't have as much a range as something like a saxophone is. You can make a lot more notes and tones with a saxophone than you can with a trumpet. The trumpet's got 3 buttons. That's it.
Well,
and it's the
And you
mixing
can-
of them.
You can hold them at different heights and everything.
Right,
like that.
but
That's how you
still
no,
get
but
it's
it.
less.
I agree with you. I'm pretty sure that's accurate. I'll double check that, but I don't think it has the same range. It does have range in a different way.
Yeah.
Loudness.
Right.
It has a lot more volume than the saxophone.
Well, because it's based on how hard you're breathing. No? Or how much wind
Yeah.
you're putting through it.
Yes, and just the shape of the instrument
Yeah.
itself. It's a horn.
Yeah.
It punches out there.
Yeah.
This is the reason that in orchestras they position the entire brass section far behind
Everything else.
Everything else, especially the orchestra, the violins, and everybody else right in front, because otherwise they would blow their ears out.
Yeah.
They're actually, and they hold their the bugle, the horn, in the upper position, so it actually acts as an arc to go
Yeah.
straight over them and into the audience. It's a powerful instrument.
And
The
I would
entire
say, though,
brass
in
section is.
ska, the trumpet would be less prolific than the trombone. I feel like the trombone had more range because of
The
the
trom-
slide.
No, I
But
think
the
it has
trom-
more dynamic capabilities.
Oh,
because of
dynamic.
that.
Okay.
And the trombone was more towards melody work as opposed to the excitement a trumpet can create. Doesn't always mesh with melodies. That's a big thing. It's a punctuating instrument. It's a rash instrument when you get right down to it.
Yes.
It has one mode, and its mode is very, very big. Unless you throw something over the actual cover.
Well,
Unless
that's
you
another
mute it.
thing. I mean,
Unless
let's
you mute it.
face it. You mute it, and a lot of modern composers, do a lot of other crazy things to any instrument. There's a modified this, modified that, prepared piano.
Well,
That's
it's just
very
like there's
common.
electric violins now that are built
Right.
differently. You still use the same bow, but the construct of electric violin, they kind of have an open framework.
open frame, because you don't need a resonance chamber within the violin when you have an
Because
electric.
it's electric,
and you
yeah.
can actually change that resonance on the violin itself.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting take on that instrument, and I've heard some amazing things.
Vanessa May.
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
one.
Look her up
Oh.
on YouTube.
By the way, she's an example of one of those violinists, virtuosos, who usually combine their work, classical music, with pop themes. And well, actually, I shouldn't say pop theme, but a pop backbeat.
I've seen her do
very common.
every genre just about.
She's done a lot, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And
what
I
else
have
to say about there's a lot to say about trumpet. I'm almost not done yet.
really.
Well,
This
all
is-
right. No,
this is-
I don't want to spend too long because I want to get as much in here as
And
possible.
Here's the last one I want to suggest, and the reason I'm going to suggest it is because it is probably the most iconic instrument, the guitar. And the reason I want to talk about the guitar is that the guitar has more variations than anything I know. And I feel
well,
like
first of all, that's because we are a product of the 21st or late 20th century, and
but the guitar is an instrument that's changed to fit genres.
it does seem very adaptable. But is that just because of the trend, perhaps? That someone, it started by changing, and they just figured, oh, well, let's change it more. Let's change it more, because...
Well, it becomes a chicken or egg. What was created first, rock and roll or the electric guitar?
The guitar.
Well, yeah, and the reason rock and roll was created is because the electric guitar created a true first unique sound in what? I don't know how many centuries. It was
quite a bit.
something new. I mean, the guitar's been around since like the mandolin.
Yeah, but the
And
guitar
it's
is still-
There's a rich history there, which I think we'll go into at some other point. But
I mean, the guitar's
it
in
goes
a-
back to medieval days. The lute, all those other instruments.
It's
The
one of those
dulcimer.
instruments that we could talk about forever. I mean,
But the electric guitar and to a lesser extent the bass have been. I mean, they couldn't even just stop at making the instrument. When they wanted to create a new sound that became new genres, they added things like the foot pedal and different reverbs and all sorts of just
Yeah, but the
random
bass
Well,
stuff.
on the whole, like the Spanish guitar, the classical guitar, were meant to achieve a little bit more of a sadder end, or a pining for the woman, as opposed to just showing off in front of her. That's what the electric guitar really brought to the stage.
But-
I mean, when you're standing, all of that, the Elvis epic, as it were.
yeah, but I mean, also the
That's what I'm saying. It was a car. I'm just saying it. It was the instrument was made to fit genres, or they experimented with it and developed genres about what they did to it. The whammy bar, that created whole new types of music by itself.
That's the ultimate show-off. This is why, I mean, this is where I think we get the masturbation on stage, which isn't even referred to. I have never heard that referred to in any other instrument except the guitar.
Yeah.
The guitar solos are basically that.
Yeah.
That it invented the superstar. No one had been a superstar with any other. You're not gonna. I'm sorry, but you're not gonna be a superstar with an upright bass. It's impossible.
Well,
you can be profoundly respected. As we encountered last week.
Well,
But
also, it was like the lead singer was usually the focus, but with the invention of the electric guitar, you were able to kind of pull focus from the lead singer.
Or you were the lead singer and
the
guitar.
guitarist, yeah.
That was the double threat, and then the bassist got nothing.
Bassist still gets nothing.
The drummer was remembered as the eccentric guy who they just kind of let hang around.
yeah, but no, the guitar was a supporting instrument for at least the early 20th century as an acoustic instrument, and I think even in its early days as an electric instrument, like we're talking like late 40s, early 50s,
Well, yeah,
when
sure.
we had a different little mid-range genres there slapped between jazz and rock, like boogie woogie and things like that.
Yeah.
It
then think of a
wouldn't be
song-
so upfront. It wouldn't be so gaudy.
Yeah, but then think about a song like Johnny Be Good, which is the epitome of guitar. Like, that song defines the guitarist. Like, Johnny Be Good, and the guitar solo in the middle of it is showing off.
I would go so far as to say that Chuck Berry himself defined the guitar.
Yeah, hell yeah. Absolutely.
Or at least solidified it into what it was to become for the next 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, and
that's
that song...
the reason we have the tradition of the last 50 years. That's the reason rock took over as the most popular
And that's the reason
music
why
form in
you
America.
needed 3 to 4 guys to play instruments. That's what you needed. Because do you need a drummer? You need a bass? You need a lead? You need a backup guitar. And that's why...
It's very
kind of
true.
reset the formula.
That's why we
There
went
was
from
an-
Stradivarius to Fenders. I mean, to be frankly honest, as the instrument.
Stradivarius, yeah.
Stradivarius to Fenders.
Yeah, I mean, that probably is the reason. The more and more we think about it, that's probably a good... We probably bookended this pretty well for a part 1 discussion, considering we started out with the violin, which was the instrument of the olden days. And the guitar is really the instrument of
And I mean,
today.
keep in mind, there's so many other... We dabbled in blending, like, with the brass and woodwind mix. I mean, think about a piano, which mixes strings, percussion. I mean...
I want to talk about the rock flute.
Well, we'll get into the kazoo. We'll get into everything.
No. Flute is a legitimate instrument that you're not going to even try to make fun of.
Just because Jethro Tull used it.
Dude, rock flute. There's the piano. There's the synthesizer. There's the theorem. I mean, there's a lot of stuff.
Theremin. Yeah, we're
Theremin,
getting
thank
into
you.
all this stuff at some point. But yeah, as I said, I think we bookended it fairly well. I think there was a pretty well-known virtuoso, like in the 1800s, in the violin, named... I want to say it was Panini. And Italian guys, because the Italian classical tradition was pretty rich as of that time period. And everyone wanted to be the Panini of this, or the Panini of that. Because he was the superstar for the violin. And that's what we've become. That's what we've grown today, as a generation of people who want to be the next guitar superstar. That's why every self-starting musician chooses the guitar as their
Think about
instrument.
guitarists like Keith Richards and Joe Perry, or James Hetfield or Kirk Hammett. Like, these are big guitarists who show off constantly on their respective bands, with their respective bands on their respective albums. And I'm just naming a few.
Forget about
Randy
that.
Rhoads.
Think of the classics. Think of Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
Think of Carlos Santana. I mean, these guys.
That said,
there's a certain element of magic that's grown up around the guitar.
Certainly. But that said, considering you started this whole discussion because you wanted to talk about diversity, does not mean that the electric guitar is limited to that.
Yeah.
It's also very, very flexible. And we heard it in this album as well. It can provide a backdrop sometimes because of all the effects, and this is more of a modern thing. I think I would say this is more of a last 20 years kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, even maybe since the 70s.
We can experiment it with it greater. We have so many things to work with.
We had a lot of pedals, even going up to it, but especially now that you can hook your computer directly into the damn thing, you can do whatever you want. You can strum something. It could sound almost nothing like you're moving so far away from the acoustic guitar at that point, it's practically a whole new instrument.
Yeah.
It becomes almost computer. Almost a full-fledged computer.
It is, but this is how we
And-
achieve, ambient sounds and whatnot. This is how
Instead of making a violin into a viola into a stand-upright bass, we gave it distortion and pedals and wah-wah and whammy bars and all sorts of stuff.
I think it has something to do with the fact that, that 6 strings on the average guitar, and many of them are often strummed at once, which means that you don't have that singular plucking effect. You're not going to get that short, brief dit. It sounds almost unnatural. When you're doing that on a guitar, you're using, either you're using a pick or you're using the side of your thumb. You strum against it, and it's 6 notes at once, and you're giving it's a very resounding effect. It's actually kind of pleasing, and that's why I think you can route anything else through it, and you can actually turn that into an ambient effect. That's very unique for the electric guitar.
So the electric guitar is magic. That's what you're getting at.
Essentially. I mean, maybe it's not that itself, it's just because it was there at that primary point in the 1950s where we elevated it to stardom, and then right after it got elevated to stardom, computers started taking off. Synths started taking off. Computer programs with all this different effects came on. This convenient timing for the guitar.
Yeah, and I think the guitar is a lead into, can be a lead into our part 2, because there are a lot more complicated instruments that we can talk about that we're not even scratching the surface on or haven't
Yes,
even
this is
mentioned
a
yet.
part 1 discussion.
Yeah.
We're going to get into all these other things. We're going to get into
The big ones would be like the piano, the synthesizer,
The oboe.
the xylophone,
Well, I'll be doing the oboe.
the theremin.
Wow, you said it right.
Yeah, I said it
I'm
right.
shocked.
It's Star Trek though. It actually has no physical parts to touch.
Yeah,
when
It's
playing.
probably the only melody I know that actually uses the pop culture melody, at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
All right, why don't we kind of wrap it up, because I need to go to bed. I'm exhausted. We have a spam, I imagine, as always.
Yes, I have a participatory spam today.
Aye.
I would...
Participatory?
No, yes, participatory. I would like you to bear with me.
Is it like a choose your own adventure path?
I don't know.
No, it's actually a very simple thing.
Okay.
Okay, when I give you the hand single, you respond very simply, Louis Vuitton. Let's give it, right? Let's try this, right?
Okay.
Ready?
Louis Vuitton.
You got it. Both answer.
Oh, I have to do it too?
You both have to answer.
I don't want to.
Okay.
Okay,
Both of
fine,
you.
fine.
Ready? On.
Louis Vuitton.
All right. One of
Louis Vuitton.
the toughest roadblocks to overcome every time a romantic relationship concludes is definitely addressing the actual gnawing lonesomeness that will generally seem to dominate your health and the
Louis Vuitton.
fearfulness that it's never going to end. This sort of feeling is usually heightened if you find yourself on your own, and it senses that you've been haunted by means of these. Losing somebody we like is among the roughest situations to deal with. Nonetheless, you may and you should get
Louis
Vuitton.
Vuitton.
beyond that, even though you may well feel you're not. Are you waiting for a change
Louis Vuitton.
to happen? Baby get carts are made to location. These folks inside Soundist. Beloved location, the place they might achieve pedals. Leader, as well as some other important characteristics. Flexible chairs are an innovation that has helped resolve point about this challenge. Virtually any kind of Go Trolley design and also design may have adjustable with capacity of, so all
Louis Vuitton.
you ought to do can be find the appropriate placement. Do you know what their first question is going to be when you tell them these
Louis Vuitton.
things? Why not? With Medtronic tuna therapy, a catheter is inserted into the urethra,
Louis Vuitton.
and 2 small needles are deployed in the obstructing prostate tissue. These needles
Louis Vuitton.
emit radio frequency,
Sounds
RF
lost it.
energy, directly and precisely into the prostate, causing thermal ablation of the obstructing tissue while protecting the
Louis Vuitton.
urethra and adjacent structures from damage. This procedure is associated with few side effects and adverse events. Possible side effects from the tuna procedure include obstruction, bleeding, pain, discomfort, urgency, frequency, and urinary tract infection. By Sox Draura Barche.
What the hell? I just hope it's as funny to listeners as it is to us.
Oh my god, dude! I was following that. That was just downright frightening.
Wow.
I tried not to laugh. I apologize, listeners. It was just terrible.
Our little bit of lack
Oh,
of
therefore,
professionalism.
preposition.
Anyway,
Noun, adverb, noun. What the hell?
our album pick for next week is John's pick. John, what album are we doing?
Oh, give me a minute. We're doing Blue October, Sway. It actually comes out tomorrow from when we're
The
recording
day the podcast
this.
drops is the
Yeah,
day
the
the new
day
record
you're hearing
comes
this
out.
is the day it comes out.
So the new Blue October record.
It's been... Okay, I gotta throw out some hash words. Indie rock with Dreamscope. I don't know where they're going, but they're supposed to be...
Dreamscope is your
Which is-
hashtag?
I don't know where it's going, but it's like supposed to be psychedelic, psychotropic,
I'm sure you'll get like one guy on Twitter
guess-
who will be like, "Oh yeah, finally,
I guess when we post
someone
up the
hashtag Dreamscope."
It's
What-
from Darkwave, which is part of goth rock.
when
boy.
Steve finally posts this this show tomorrow,
Third base.
I'll make sure that I hashtag it Dreamscope, or maybe I'll wait till next week's episode.
Yeah,
to
do that
hashtag
one.
it
I'll tell you
Dreamscope.
exactly how to hashtag.
Okay.
Hashtag Dreamscope, hashtag psychedelic, hashtag indie rock.
Episode 59, our Dreamscope podcast.
I don't
Signing
know.
off.
That was
at the
one-
bottom of the hour.
And just on that bombshell,
And as always...
my need to go to bed.
on the jazz note, please.
Oh, you want to wrap it up with jazz note? Okay, are we all going to do it?
No, I think Steve...
On that note, and as always, music is life.
And life is good.